Well, good evening. This is Tommy Ellison coming to you from Alabama. And this is my rendition of Vlogmas, episode 6. And looking back at memories from Christmas past. You know, old Ebenezer, thinking about him today, his trip back as to Christmas past were, pretty tough. Pretty tough on him. Not a real pretty picture. But I've been thinking about some of the past traditions that have, been part of my life over the last, 7 years. And tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of Christmas Eve traditions that I've experienced growing up. And, I don't know about you, but people have different ideas about what, or when rather, Christmas gifts should be opened. And around our house, we were always allowed to open one present on Christmas Eve. And that was it. We had to wait till the following morning on Christmas Day. Apparently that was a tradition that had started in my mom's house and perhaps my dad, although I can remember my dad telling me that Christmas wasn't a big deal for him. They were very poor, lived in the country, and typically for Christmas he'd get a pair of pants and maybe some hickory nuts and possibly a package of firecrackers. That was about it. And his granddaddy used to dress up like an old oilcloth with chains and come up on the front porch of the cabin that they lived in and start yelling, "I'm Santa Claus." Well, anyway, that was his tradition. My tradition was we always got to open one gift on Christmas Eve. And of course, we always saw the gifts lying around the tree. So it was always important for us to try to shake them and try to figure out what was in, because we wanted to open a good gift that we could play with Christmas Eve night, waiting to go to Mass. And so nevertheless, my mom got to the point where she would wrap things that were important to her for me to have, like socks or a sweater or maybe some handkerchiefs. But she would always put something else in the box that made it sound a little different. Sounds like a toy, if you know what I mean. And so there were a number of occasions where she fooled me. And I'd pick up the wrong one, like, oh, crap. Red socks on Christmas Eve. Well, I guess I can wear them to Mass. And I say that because midnight Mass was always a very large tradition in my family. My mom came from a family of 10 kids. And so there was lots of cousins, and they were all part of the same parish that we were members of. And so we would all go to midnight Mass. And, I don't know if any of you that were raised Catholic remember this, but, midnight Mass at the Catholic Church back in the, mid to late 50s was all the old Latin Mass. It was, the entire Mass was in Latin, and in many instances, the Mass was sung by the priest. In fact, it was a very traditional Mass, and the fact that all the vestments were worn, all the candles were born. This was before Vatican II, where the Pope kind of anglicized the Mass and started putting all of the liturgy in English. And of course, the Missal was very critical to the understanding of the Mass, because otherwise it was done in Latin. Well, one of the other things about the midnight Mass, and it was really kind of neat, was when you went to midnight Mass, well, you didn't have to go to church the next morning, because as you Catholics know, Christmas is a holy day of obligation, and obligation is the key word here, because it meant you had to go to Mass on that particular day at some point in time. So when you went to Christmas Eve Mass, because it was 12:01, 12:05, that's technically Christmas Day, then you got to get a pass on going the next morning. And that just gave you more opportunity to, to play with the toys that you hopefully were about to get. At least that was the plan that was going through our head. But the neat thing about midnight mass, in addition to the hall pass the next day, was the fact that, well, we always got to see little Catherine Gallagher puke in the pews. And you say, well, why would you say that? Well, you see, I was an altar boy. And as you can see from the picture, the altar boys wore the fancy cassock and the surplice. And so that was the costume that we wore. But the other neat thing about an altar boy was you got to work with the incense. This was the incense that would be burning on the coals, and it was to represent the presence of the Holy Spirit, the smoke was. But that incense had a certain sweet smell to it. And regardless of when and where it was used, that incense would cause a certain number of people to get a little nauseous when they smelled it. And of course, that was where little Mary Catherine Gallagher in our class, we could always count on her to be at midnight mass, and we could always count on her to smell the incense, and we could always count on her to throw up. And of course, when you're a kid, when you're a 7, 8, 9-year-old kid, there's just something magical about a girl throwing up. Well, in fact, it was at the first taste of wine I ever had was serving at a midnight mass, because the priest would have in the ceremony of communion, they would have the wine, they would have the bread, and of course, if you again are brought up in the Catholic Church, you know that the sacred nature of that activity was such that the priest would have the wine prepared prior to the mass in little glass fixtures called cruets, if I recall. It's been a long time ago. And so the altar boys would pour the wine into the goblet, or the chalice rather, and the priest would wipe the edges, and then he would take a sip of the wine in the course of taking his communion. And some of the priests actually didn't use all of the wine. They would leave a little bit in the cruets. And so after Mass, well, we would get that little bit of leftover wine, and we were supposed to pour it down the sink, but in reality, we would pour it down our mouth. And first wine I ever had was altar wine in a Catholic church, serving the Mass as an altar boy. And as I said, some of the priests drank it all, and that was a little bit of a disappointment because, well, we didn't get our hit there that day. It wasn't all that great in the morning anyway. And I've noticed, though, the guys that took a lot of wine, priests, they always could sing a little better after communion when they sang the liturgy in the high mass. All the high mass was sung. If you ever have opportunity to go to a high mass, a real Latin high mass, it's quite an experience. It's almost as good as going to a Pentecostal church service. But when I got older, we started to realize that Santa wasn't necessarily the guy that we thought he was, and we found out about where the presents really came from. So unfortunately for me, when we got ready to come back from Mass, my mom would always say, "No, I need you to help me put together your sister's gifts for Christmas." She was 10 years younger than me. So when I was about 12 or 13 and kind of fully bought into the idea of who or what Santa Claus was or wasn't, I was always called on to assist my mom in the construction of these various things that she had bought for my sister. And I remember one year, this particular item that came up for sale and she bought was this kitchen set for her. It was a little girl, 3, 4 years old, was going to play house, going to play kitchen. And so there was this little pink kitchen set, the refrigerator, and then the sink and the stove. And the only bad thing about this was it was not as substantial as it looks. It was all made of cardboard. And of course, well, as you might imagine, it was not just cardboard in the kitchenware, but it was a cardboard box that it came in. It was about like that. It was kind of like going to IKEA, if you want to know the truth. It was a foretaste of the IKEA store, because that big kitchen set, refrigerator, stove, sink, all came shipped in a box about 40 inches wide, maybe 40 inches long, and about 6 inches deep. And of course, when you unpacked it and looked at the instructions, you realized that, well, it was kind of like an IKEA piece of furniture, because it was broken down into the smallest common denominator of pieces and screws and things of that nature. And so we would start the assembly line about 2 a.m. and begin to put together the kitchenware that particular year. Now, the problem was, by the time we got out of that long high mass, it was typically around 1:30 or 2 o'clock before we'd get home. And I always wondered, now that I think about it, where my dad was when all this was going on. He was a deputy sheriff, and I guess some nights he claimed he was out on patrol, but I got a feeling he might have been patrolling the Green Lantern Bar or someplace like that, looking out for his buddies and tossing one back and allowing his 12-year-old son to work with his wife to put together the Christmas gifts for my little baby sister, Anna. Well, I just remember, and this memory is what I would probably recall the most of all those years, with what I called the kitchen from hell. In the catalog, it looked like that pink kitchen, but when it delivered, it came in that flat box with, the old saying, some assembly required. I hated that saying. I still hate that saying, some assembly required. It's like saying one size fits all. Well, that's a lie. One size might fit many, but, being a big kid, one size did not fit all. I can assure you of that. And as you saw from the instructions, it was not exactly what you would call a easy to install or easy to assemble Christmas present. But typically by sunrise, we were done. And also by sunrise, I had typically learned some really new cuss words from my mom as we wrestled with the contents of that box, trying to put things together. And I never really saw my mother have a drink before until we started building that kitchen, and that was when she got the wine out. I didn't get any. Hey, I was 12 years old. But that night, I remember her having a drink. First time I ever saw her throw one back. If I recall, I had hot chocolate at 3 a.m. And we got almost all of the tiny screws, used up in the construction. So we were real proud. I mean, they always send a few extra, right? Yeah, of course, right. But the kitchen was complete, and we were pretty confident it was going to hold till New Year's. That was our bet. Just keep it together for a week or so until she lost interest in it once and for all. And as we finished up, I don't know, it was probably 5:30 in the morning. About 20 minutes later, as we were preparing to go to bed, my little sister comes into the living room where our old aluminum Christmas tree with the rotating blue lights was on. You remember those? It looked something like that. You remember? It was the cat's pajama in the 50s. An aluminum Christmas tree with aluminum thistles. And remember, there was a spotlight that would be on the floor that had multicolored filters in it. And as the filters would rotate, the light would shine up on the tree, and of course, the light of the tree would change color. It was gorgeous. It was gorgeous. And that's exactly what my sister said when she walked in and saw that kitchen set. She said, wow. In her words, she said, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I love my new kitchen. Hey, y'all, you want me to cook breakfast? And we're like, are you kidding? We're not doing anything but going to bed. And you go back to bed as well. We'll call you in an hour or two. Well, that's a memory that I have from Christmas past. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's just what it was when I was a young man, about 12 or 13 years old. Well, I hope you enjoyed the story. We'll be back tomorrow for episode 7 of Vlogmas, and we hope you have a great evening and look forward to having a great week with Ecamm Vlogmas. You guys take care. Have a great time.